Welcome again to the Arabic Hour. My name is Joe Hack, and I'm honored and very happy to have with me at this time two doctors, professors of economics. One is in Lebanon, one is in Canada, and the topic that we are going to discuss is a very, very important, and it is the topic of the hour right now, so far as Lebanon is concerned, and the Lebanese diaspora has a lot of opinions about it, negative and positive. But let me just give a 1-minute introduction to what we're going to be talking about. Lebanon has just completed an agreement brokered by the US that establishes the demarcation lines of the respective shares of Lebanon and the state of Israel at the southern borders of Lebanon. The agreement is hailed by some as a major breakthrough for Lebanon, allowing it to exploit the reserves in Qana. And what is at surface does not match what is at the bottom. However, we all believe that a few were not happy with the agreement because it may take Lebanon 6 to 7 years before it can generate revenues, while Israel will produce its Karish rigs immediate revenues. We know what the issue there is. Yes, indeed, Lebanon established its property rights, but 100% rights of zero is still zero. Lebanon should have argued for sharing in the revenues of the entire Levant because what we believe is that this basin belongs to everyone in that area, and resources don't obey political boundaries. And whom I have right now is Dr. Atif Kubursi, Professor Emeritus of Economics, President of Economic Research, former Undersecretary of the United Nations, Chair Global Data Footprint. Welcome, Dr. Kubursi.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much.
And of course, I'm so honored, and this is my first time. I hope we can repeat this several times, Dr. Akar. I do have with me Dr. Walid Akar, who's a professor of economics at Sagesse University. I hope I pronounced it right. And I have the honor on both sides. And when I sit between two professors, I remember from my years at the university, I'm intrigued by how do I reply or how do I fit? I fit as a student right now. So let me start with Dr. Kubursi. What is your take on this, Dr. Kubursi?
Well, you see, thank you, Joe, for your kind introduction. And you fit very well, by the way. You look more like a professor than Dr. Walid or I.
Thank you.
Nice beard and white hair. Look, the situation really is rooted in a mistake that began in 2007 under the Prime Minister at that time of Fuad Senura, who agreed to an agreement with Cyprus to draw the boundaries. And it established a line called Line 1, which Israel immediately, automatically, and very fast declared its acceptance of the line, which to a great extent disenfranchised, dispossessed Lebanon of a major area that belonged to it. And then the whole situation now is trying to unravel that mistake in 2007. And there were two lines, one called 23 and one called 29. The 29 was one that was established by the Lebanese armed forces, who used topographical maps and were able to demarcate the lines that would have given Lebanon about 1,400 square kilometers, and where Karish and Qana would both belong to Lebanon. And then the tug of war started that we ended up with line 23 that would give Qana to Lebanon, not fully, some part of it really lies outside it, and gave Israel Karish. Now the story is not issue of property rights. Yes, United States came into the picture, and there is a general agreement that Lebanon now has the full rights over Qana, except for a small part, 17%, that Total you really would have to concede some property rights to the Israelis. But it's even more serious than that, because they have to share data with the United States and Israel about everything, and that there is going to be a situation in which Israel may remove its consent for Lebanon to start French company that Lebanon has contracted with to the exploration and lifting. But as you mentioned in the introduction,
Yes.
Joe, the story is Israel gets to exploit Karish and to lift whatever gas there is automatically right now, whereas Lebanon has to wait 6-7 years, and it has to establish that there is really gas there. And my worry is, as you said, the political borders that are used now to demarcate this may not coincide with the lines of the reservoirs, of the aquifers where the gas is. And what's even worse is that it may take 7 years to lift it. And by then, what assurance does Lebanon have that there will be gas? One. Two, that Israel would not use land drilling under the sea to tap into it. And three, by the time Lebanon gets the gas, the price of gas may not be as high as it is now. Today, the United States is on the hook to deliver gas to Europe to replace the shortfall that came from the dismantling of Nord Stream 2 and the difficulties with Nord Stream 1. So the story is extremely tenuous here, that what probably Lebanon should have done, as you said, should have really asked for saying, okay, this is a shared resource. There is no real way in which we can demarcate these lines. Whoever lifts a dollar has to share it with the other. Now you say this does not constitute a recognition of Lebanon of Israel. Yes, it was an indirect agreement brokered by the United States. But then if it was an indirect agreement, why didn't we go for agreeing to share revenues right now? Lebanon needs the money now, needs it when the price of gas is so high, needs it now because of the bankruptcy state that it's in.
Correct.
So why postpone?
Okay. Well, I really appreciate that. If you give me a minute, I want to go to Dr. Akar and ask for his opinion and his take on this. Dr. Akar, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Joe. The situation between Lebanon and Israel is not a usual one. It's not between two independent states that have been existing since hundreds of years.
Yes.
It's an old dispute over the borders, whether it's the borders in the sea, the maritime border, or the land border. This has been the case since the existence of Israel in 1948.
Yes.
Lebanon did not recognize the right of Israel to exist as an independent state for many ideological reasons, historical reasons, and others that it's not the time to go into that now. But for both Lebanon and Israel today, they both have economic interest in energy exploration in the sea. And this common interest has driven both Lebanon and Israel through the intermediaries of the West and the US in particular to try to reach an agreement, and they did. Now, what is the deal about? The deal sets a border for the first time between Lebanese and Israeli water borders, which we like to call occupied Palestine. So the deal sets a border in the sea
Yes.
for the first time along a demarcation referred to as a line called line 23. By the way, as Dr. Kubursi mentioned, line 23 was not accepted. It was rejected by the Lebanese authorities for a long time in all the previous years. Even when Israel was occupying almost half of Lebanon and made an agreement in 1982-83 with Lebanon, even then, with all the pressure that Israel was exercising over Lebanon, Lebanon refused the today agreed upon line 29, if we can later show that on the map.
The May 17th agreement, yes.
Yeah, so it means that for Lebanon to give up Karish field, which is further to the south, to the Israelis, and to agree to take over Qana gas field and even probably to share it, as I understand, reduces the areas of blocks 8 and 9, which is in the south of Lebanon, that belong to Lebanon, as we all know. So, in brief, Israel retains full rights to develop the Karish field, which they already started to do, which is a guaranteed case. It guarantees Israel approximately 2.4 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, while Lebanon retains full right to develop Qana, which is further to the north, which is, you know, as you said in the introductory that you presented, it's zero, it's 100% of zero, which is zero. We have no idea what the case is till now because it has not been explored yet.
I appreciate that very much, and I have a few points to discuss with both of you. But I have in my hand an article written by David Schenker. I don't need to tell you who Dave Schenker is, and what he says, and that's on October 11th in the I think it was in the not in the Financial Post, but in the Financial Times. And I don't want to read it all, but let me tell you what he says. He says 2 years later, the states have reached an agreement on their offshore exclusive economic zone boundary, that's about Lebanon, that relatively favors Lebanon during negotiations mediated by the Biden administration. And here's the point. Israel conceded the entirety of its claim to the 330 square mile zone to Lebanon in return for a 3-mile internationally recognized buffer zone adjacent to the shorelines. Now, and well, he goes on to say that it was really the force of the resistance of the Lebanese Hezbollah that really forced Israel to submit to this agreement. Now, where do we go here? I know what you said about both about line 29 and the army, etc. But what would you have done? I mean, I know psychologically and I know logically and what we call for, but did Lebanon have any other alternatives, Dr. Kubursi?
Yes. Look, there is one thing we cannot in any shape or form discount or not take into account. America is on the hook to deliver gas to Europe before the winter comes and to replace what they lost from what used to come from Russia.
Yes.
We have a situation where there is incredible pressure on the American administration to deliver this energy to Europe before they freeze in the winter. So there is really a situation where it's very critical for the US. And the US has used all its weight to pressure the two parties to an agreement. The issues here is that did Lebanon yield to the pressure far in excess of what would have really been its interest. I submit that yes, they had yielded a lot more than they should. The line 29, which the Lebanese army had established, and which the UN has used in the negotiation between Kenya and Somalia, and there is precedent for that. It would have given Lebanon not the 300-mile, but 1,400 kilometers, and would have given Karish to Lebanon. And Karish is one with proven reserves. Qana, we don't have at this moment any certainty about how much gas. And even when we get the certainty of the gas, there is really a situation here where by the time we lift it, it may not be as valuable. Price might have really come down. Two, I'm not so sure that the Israelis are so generous that they would really make sure Lebanon get the full reserves. But even worse than this, one of the major reasons Russia is in the Middle East and has come to help Syria, not because Syria is a darling of Russia. It came in to prevent Qatar from establishing a gas pipeline through Syria to Europe to replace Russia.
Yes.
To what extent that Russia now is on the ground and is not 1,000 miles away from Karish or Qana, but less than 100 miles, to what extent is it going to accept this complete process? I think we are, to some extent here.
We heard nothing from Russia, have we?
Yeah, no, and we're squishing Lebanon into a conflict that may be quite difficult to resolve. We have given the US a pivot in the Mediterranean it did not have. And we are denying Russian a pivot that they thought by coming to Syria they have. To a great extent, the issues are far greater than just a demarcation of line that would split revenues or split resources. So to a great extent, I'm worried. We're getting Lebanon into a situation that is not as peaceful, conducive, or acceptable. And yes, I accept one thing you said, and that's very important. The Lebanese government had very limited bargaining power. Hezbollah, with its drone and going over Karish and declaration that is willing to fight to protect the interests of Lebanon, had played a very fundamental role in persuading the Israelis that the alternative to this peace agreement could be a major escalation.
Total submissiveness, perhaps. Dr. Akar, I want to move on to another point. Shortly after the signing the agreement, we all saw a very high-level delegation from Cyprus that came to Lebanon immediately to sign an agreement. What is the relationship, Dr. Akar? Was that as a result of what happened, or was it, again, pressure from the US? I just would like to hear your analysis.
The agreement with Cyprus was easier to come up with because it was complementary to what was done with Israel. The main issue was the Israeli conflict or the conflict with Israel. And the observers in Lebanon, the majority of observers, have been disappointed with the deal that was made with Israel. Whether they were disappointed purely for rational economic reasons or for political reasons is another issue. But the fact is that they were disappointed because the border was drawn. You know, we have common borders with Israel in the land, which is different than the situation with Cyprus. With Cyprus is much easier because it's only the sea between us and between the two countries. Now, the sea border was drawn from starting from the land, from the sea by the land, with the first 2.2 miles as a straight line, and then following along the line 23, which was agreed upon. Instead, of line 29. That was the new thing that took place and Lebanon agreed upon. And this is why many observers were disappointed, giving more advantages to Israel rather than to Lebanon. If you allow me just to mention one fact here to support my point, line 29 demanded by Lebanon earlier in the previous years
Yes.
is further to the south, and agreeing to line 23 means a loss of approximately 700 square miles in the sea, which is enormous given the area of Lebanon and the area of Israel. The issue with Cyprus is subject to international agreements that there's not a great dispute about them.
Yes.
Lebanon, as I can tell from my readings and following what is going on, Lebanon is desperate to benefit from such a deal in order to attract foreign investments, in order to rescue its economy from a complete collapse we have been suffering from in the previous couple of years.
Right.
It's a devastating situation. This is nothing compared, the situation between Lebanon and Israel, nothing to be compared to the one between Lebanon and Cyprus.
Agreed. I again I have a couple of more points to discuss, but one is we all know that Netanyahu is again the prime minister of Israel with a very large majority, and one of the issues in the campaign was the agreement that Lapid really was scared by, as he put it, Hassan Nasrallah, and he was very submissive to sign this agreement. Now, Netanyahu may revoke this agreement. Now, do you, and the question goes to both. Do you feel that the U.S. will actually exert a lot of pressure on Netanyahu not to revoke it? Dr. Kubursi, quickly, please.
Well, today the Lebanese government has announced that one of the persuasive points that allowed Lebanon and persuaded Lebanon to agree is that they were given guarantees by the US government that they will pressure Israel. And Israel, that depends so heavily on the United States, militarily, financially, and everything, yes. I don't think have much option to oppose and to disregard the interest of the US. So to some extent, I think this agreement, which I believe has been quite favorable, and I disagree with Schenker, this has been a very favorable agreement to the Israelis, guaranteed them the immediate right to lift and to get and generate revenues, and to get not only Karish, but also to get 17% of Qana, maybe not direct to Lebanon, but where would Total get its money? I mean, it's not going to print money, it's going to get it from whatever agreement
Lebanon,
it has.
yes.
And by the way, there are some new developments that came in. Qatar now has joined in. So there used to be only Total and INI, the yes. Italian one, and another company that is owned by Total, but now the Qataris are coming in. And some people were raising some questions whether this is good for Israel or not, given what the Gulf countries have done and have forsaken the Arabs in many of the things. I am not so happy or persuaded that the Qataris would be immune or would be insensitive to the American interest and would not really serve these interests. Now, the issue that is really worrying me, and one that Lebanon has to some extent turned its back to and may regret it, is not that Qataris are coming in. What will the Russians do? How will they respond to Lebanon and Israel replacing Russian gas and oil in Europe when Russia depends so heavily. Oil and gas for Russia is extremely important. 75% of their export proceeds, maybe a higher ratio in terms of their budget. They're not going to sit idle. They're not going to turn a blind eye to this step taken by Lebanon. And Russia is not anymore 10,000 miles. The US is far away. Russia is in Syria and has not only Air Force bases, it has also naval bases in Tartus. So to a great extent, Lebanon has put itself, squished itself into a very large conflict over which it has very little influence. My worry here is not Netanyahu. I think he is one way or the other. Israel is a compliant state and would not really turn its back to its benefactor, the United States. But what will happen if Russia decides that no gas or oil? I mean, notice that one of the things that the Israelis trying to avoid the Russians in Syria have done is to take this oil, take this gas and don't put it through a pipeline. Send it to Egypt so that it would be liquefied and then let it leave from Egypt to Europe. We are into a very sensitive period and the stakes are extremely high and one has to wait and see, but I don't look in any way that this is going to be a peaceful and an orderly transition. We are entering into a conflictual adversarial relationship, and the world is literally facing some very fundamental challenges and uncertainties, and we have moved the Ukrainian-Russian war into the Mediterranean.
Yes, I appreciate that very much. And some people, of course, the topic of Qatar entering the milieu of what's going on, some say that's an indication that Qatar would want to have peace and tranquility in Lebanon, and perhaps the whole Gulf would not want to create any or to see any more problems within Lebanon. So it may contribute to Lebanon's stability. But I want to go back to you, Dr. Akar, and I want to take your opinion about the strength of the U.S. on the decisions that Israel makes. Is it the strength of the U.S. on Israel, or is it the strength of Israel on the U.S.?
I really do not know. I cannot tell. But if I go back to answer that with a question,
Yes.
I go back to your original question, which is about the election of Netanyahu, if it is finalized. Let me read this short statement from the article, from the agreement. It says, I quote, Israel shall work with the Bloc 9 operator, which is probably Total, in good faith to ensure that this agreement is resolved in a timely fashion. This is what the agreement says.
Yes.
And if we look at this, and we look at Qana, the field, which is in question here, which is yet to be explored, as we said, and nothing is clear about the existence of sufficient quantities of gas to make efficient extraction. So the situation with the new government in Israel, which might be more difficult to deal with than the present government, depends on the exploration that will take place. Because the discovery at its best in Qana, which is a much bigger area than Karish, is of 15 trillion cubic feet of natural gas reserves. which could lead in the present day market price of natural gas to 6 billion of revenues over the coming 15 years. So this is the issue that might lead to a disagreement, as mentioned in the agreement I just read. So it will take years before revenues reach the state for any government in Israel, whether Netanyahu or other. It depends on the wealth that is yet to be discovered in Qana. Is it worth it to have a disagreement on it? Or maybe, as you said in the beginning, it's 100% of zero. We have yet to see. And so the deal did not really specify an arrangement on how profits are going to be distributed if there is enough substantial, amount of natural gas. What royalties Israel is expected to get from Qana, and this is, yet to be known. Now, whether this is a very controversial issue, who influences who in this relationship, political and historical relationship between Israel and the U.S. I think there is a common interest between them, and it's much stronger than a minor issue such as this.
I think Dr. Kubursi wants to comment on that. If you go ahead, I know it was an unfair question to decide in 30 seconds, but the situation is like this. It's very ambiguous. Go ahead, Dr. Kubursi.
No, but the story here, I'm not worried about the new Israeli government, because to a great extent, the Israeli government coming in cannot object and will not object. This is my prediction. What worries me is the lack of government in Lebanon.
Yes, of course.
And to a great extent, that vacuum at this critical time, when we need to move fast, when we need to guarantee and exercise our property rights, we cannot afford more delays. But what's even more interesting, and what is worrying many of us, and I'm sure Dr. Akar would know more about this than I do, being in situ, he's right in Lebanon. What guarantees do I have that if this $6 billion is going to come over the lifetime of this, would be used in a way that would serve the interests of the Lebanese people and the Lebanese economy, and would not really be subjected to the same corrupt elite that have completely bankrupted the country? That's a very fundamental question, and one we cannot dismiss.
Of course it is. And I think what was suggested by various leaders, and I put that in brackets, in Lebanon, is the fact that they are going to establish the sovereignty fund. Now, the sovereignty fund, if it's ruled by the same powers, we know what will happen to the sovereignty fund. But let's hope that the Lebanese will come to terms among themselves and form a government, because right now really it's a total vacuum. And do you see anything happening on the horizons, Dr. Akar, about maybe having a government formed in the next short while?
Not really, but the level of corruption we have been suffering from will definitely prevent the money, any money coming from any natural resource, from being enjoyed by the Lebanese population and the Lebanese economy. This is something definite we all know about. It is estimated now by the World Bank and by the United Nations organizations such as UNIDO, that half the Lebanese population, which is approximately 3 million, are living under the poverty line. So what guarantees do we have with the same people in power for many, many years, for tens of years, with the same corrupt system that we have? What kind of guarantee we have as Lebanese people that this money, any money coming to Lebanon, is going to be invested or spent or used in the right direction. And as you said, Lebanon actually is corrupt to the level that it's not ready for to have the mechanism, as you mentioned, as a sovereign wealth fund or a fiscal policy to properly manage any oil and gas sector, if it exists, without drastic reforms, without really drastic reforms that can guarantee where the revenues go. It's a useless situation.
Yeah,
let's put things in proportion.
Yeah.
Okay, the $6 billion expected, and now it's at current prices. There's no guarantee that these prices will hold in the future. Today, the price is sky high because of the shortage of gas coming from Russia to Europe. But suppose that it's 6 billion. This is twice as large than the money we are negotiating to borrow from the IMF, International Monetary Fund.
yes,
And to a great extent is a small proportion of the total deficit on our balance of payment and on the budget. You know, that people say that the gap now between what resources we have and what we owe internationally and what is required to refinance the banks so they do not establish that haircut of what the poor depositors have, we're talking about $40 billion. So to a great extent, we're really still in a very difficult situation. I see no end to this unless the Lebanese government would come to terms with making sure that those who smuggled their money out and the banks who raided the people's deposits
yeah,
bear some responsibility, come to the table with these resources. A very reputable forensic accounting firm had established that Lebanese own about $800 billion in offshore accounts, and
Correct.
mostly by corrupt political plutocrats. We need to bring this money back. We need to bring a part of it. There is no way you could persuade people to come to the table and surrender some of their wealth to save and bail the government unless we find that there are credible measures and credible amounts had been recovered by the Lebanese government from those who have smuggled and those who have raided public funds. Billions of dollars have been earmarked and spent by the Lebanese government on
correct.
universities and hospitals, none of which had existed.
Exactly.
Billions of dollars have really been allocated to the Arab autostrad. Land has been,
Generation of electricity.
Okay, and where is the $40 billion that we squandered in the?
Yeah. That is true. Dr. Akar, Dr. Kubursi has heard this before, but I humbly described the situation in Lebanon not as 18 sects, tawa'if. I said Lebanon is divided into 18 franchises. Each franchise takes its share. And how can you create an entity? How can you create a nation or a country out of 18 franchises? It's impossible. So really, the issue, as you said, complete reform. And unfortunately, that's not in the foreseeable future. Yeah, the Lebanese will remain under the poverty line. And I know from our community in Edmonton, Alberta, which is mostly from the origins are from the Biqa side, several villages. If it weren't for the remittances sent from here to Yanta, Kharbet Ruha, Bekka, Kfardinis, Duha, many of these villages, their survival depends on how much money is remitted, how much money is sent from Canada to them. Now, the issue, and I don't think we still have enough time. I'd like to invite you back to this very wonderful discussion one more time to discuss what the solutions are. I mean, we know that as it is, Lebanon has no hope. That's my perhaps pessimistic opinion. But would you both agree to join us again to discuss what would be the alternative to the existing unbearable situation on the Lebanese, and why would the 5 million Lebanese living in Lebanon, why would they sit so quietly and accept getting hit over the head and sometimes in other places and not do anything about it? I think we've come to the end of the time, unfortunately, but I was so honored and so happy to have you both. And please accept our invitation to come to another program, because there are so many things to discuss. And as I said, I would really like to host you again to talk about what do the Lebanese have as alternative to the existing, let's call them the existing franchises. How do we come out of this? Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Kubursi, Dr. Akal. We appreciate your presence, your comments. I'm sure that all of our viewers would appreciate what you have just said, and I'm so honored to have you both, and I will welcome you again.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.